Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the launch of our new report, International Talent and Economic Growth, produced in partnership with EY. Can I start by introducing myself? I'm Chris Hayward, and I'm the Policy Chairman and the Political Leader of the City of London Corporation. I wanted to just start this meeting with some housekeeping announcements. Firstly, today's event is being recorded and may be shared on our digital platforms in the future. For the question and answer session at the end, please post questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen and specify who it is for. And thirdly, if you have any technical difficulties, ask a question and our team will try to help. Now, last autumn, the City of London Corporation launched our landmark report, Vision for Economic Growth. It's an ambitious roadmap for UK financial and professional services to drive UK economic growth for the rest of this decade and indeed beyond. And yesterday, we released our annual benchmarking report focused on the United Kingdom's global competitiveness. London remains the world's leading global financial centre, but there are challenges ahead for UK economic growth. Any ambition for economic growth must consider, of course, skills and talent. Businesses need access to top global talent and the flexibility of talent mobility to allow them the skills they need when they need them. And this new report highlights two crucial points on global talent. First, there is currently no global framework for measuring the economic impact of international talent for the host country. The United Kingdom has a key opportunity to show leadership by creating a framework which includes wider indirect metrics of productivity, such as entrepreneurialism and innovation and research. And second, the United Kingdom currently lacks a clear global talent strategy. All our competitor markets are introducing migration policies to drive economic productivity. Now, a new United Kingdom strategy must combine a broad skills approach with thematic policies, such as targeting skills gaps and labour shortages. So I would like to thank EY, and in particular, Dr. Seema Farazi, for their continued partnership on this crucial topic. And I will now hand over to Seema to present the report's findings in more details. Seema, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and we are delighted to be here. This is, I think, our fifth year of partnership as we sort of continue research on global talent and ensuring the UK's competitiveness for the sector. So I'm really delighted to be talking through the report findings. We have some slides which have some of the key findings. If we could share those now, that would be great. Just a little bit of background on our partnership. So in September 2020, we started to look at what a world-class visa regime really looks like and how does the UK go about attracting the best and brightest talent into the UK. In October 2020, there was a separate research paper where we focused with the City UK on trade, investment policy, and how to help UK businesses secure access to global talent through effective trade mobility partnerships. In our work, of course, with the City of London on the Khalifa Review, we looked at the need to make the UK attractive to fintech scale-ups, particularly with the job creation potential that sits around the scale-ups in the sector. And in September 2021, we revisited all of that work, mindful of all of the changes that had taken place throughout the pandemic, to assess how far the UK had come and what opportunities for progress remained. Last year, actually 1 year ago now, I'm still thinking 2023, in November 2022, we looked at post-pandemic trends. So what does the shift in global workforces actually mean for the future of global workforces and cross-border working? And all of the themes from these different reports are very relevant to what we're talking about today. And what we're doing in this report really is reviewing progress of all of the work that's gone in there and all of the changes that we've seen, very rapid, accelerated changes across migration policy across the world, and how kind of changing market conditions, enhanced competition, emerging focus on AI talent, short skills in the green skills area, and innovative approaches around borderless work might change direction of travel, or how we can kind of revisit what is a good way forward to ensure UK competitiveness. Now, one of the key premises of this report, and Mr. Chairman, you alluded to it there very nicely, is that effective global talent policies, they support and complement domestic labour markets and skills prioritisation. This is a really important point as we talk about kind of sustainable migration policy amidst global competition. And we're going to come right back to that point towards the end. Where we end, it's a bit of a spoiler alert for the report, is that the UK is really starting here from a position of strength, but it cannot afford to be complacent. What we find in the report is that 100% of the UK's competitive markets in this sector are approaching policy in a much more nuanced way. And what will be helpful for ensuring UK competition will be a shift to a more strategic global talent policies, with policies that really closely align to strategic economic objectives and external pressures, and can flex appropriately as those objectives move and as some of those pressures come to bear. And we put robust stakeholder engagement at the core of that strategy. So let's start by looking at the evidence on the why. Now, there are two very positive factors that we flag and two that are more challenging. Now, firstly, the research shows that global talent, international talent that's coming into the sector in a smart, secure, sustainable way has a disproportionately positive impact on economic productivity. And in the report, you find an extensive literature review on immigration and economic productivity, looking at different approaches at domestic, global, and regional level. There's a lot of really interesting data points in there. I'll just take you through some of the headlines. Migrants make up less than an estimated 5% of the global workforce today, but 10% of global GDP. Cross-border migration is generating an annual economic output of around 9 trillion, but the research that we talk about in the report points to an opportunity to more than double that, to around 20 trillion a year by 2050. There is evidence that shows that workers moving to higher productivity settings increase global GDP, in some cases by 10%. 83% of non-migrant residents in the 22 richest OECD countries are experiencing net economic gains from migrants. We see also in the report lots of stories of overrepresentation of global talent among academics, scientists, entrepreneurs, and many high-income OECD countries. And in some of the reports that we've looked at and the research that we've looked at globally, for example, the US, there's a Harvard Business Review report that talks about the disproportional representation of migrants across US Nobel Prize winners and patent holders. And it talks about over half of the US startups in 2018 that were valued at 1 billion or more being founded by at least one migrant. We look at UK data similarly, and we find that 9 of the UK's 14 startup unicorns have at least one non-UK born co-founder, and 49% of the UK's fastest growing businesses have at least one non-UK born co-founder. Now, in the report, we review the strength of the data. So to the point that was raised in opening, the maturity of the data does vary depending on whether you're looking at direct or indirect factors. And we've looked at things like output per worker, GDP growth per capita, GVA per worker, wage growth, employment rates, labour dependency, and then some of the indirect factors. So entrepreneurship, patents, startups, unicorns, boardroom diversity, leadership, research and development, innovation, SMEs, levelling up, brand. It's a point that we come back to a few times in the report, and trade relationships. And we make recommendations around a much more comprehensive and hopefully more dynamic framework of those direct and indirect measures of global talent mobility impact. The reason for that is that they will holistically support informed policy decisions and hopefully create conditions for success in an increasingly challenging environment. Now, the second why, when you overlay that contribution in the sector, this idea of kind of smart, sustainable, secure migration of global talent really plays a vital role in the resilience of the sector. Now, most of you joining this call will know that across financial services and tech, fintech in particular, in the UK at the moment, you could have anything up to 40%, in some cases a little bit more reliance on global talent. And in 2021, a review of the data shows that migrant workers in all sectors of the City of London contributed 34 billion to the City of London's GBA and 8 billion through tax contributions to the UK. And that's looking at direct factors alone before you take into account the indirect factors. Now, we come to the challenges. So what are the reasons why we should look at this from a challenges perspective? If we just stay on that last slide for a second, please. The global workforce, there are challenges everywhere around global workforces. Almost every country is experiencing an aging population. A lot of the research that we look at suggests that by 2050, about 40 million workers will exit the labour force in Europe alone. Countries are experiencing skills gaps, labour shortages, with innovation and productivity dropping as a result. In some cases, we've seen research showing a labour market mismatch between jobs available and the skills of the workforce. And in Germany, for example, 42% of services companies have been experiencing reduced output due to shortage of workers. Other data points that we look at show that a global human talent shortage of more than 85 million people by 2030 will result in an almost $8.5 trillion worth of unrealized annual revenues if not addressed. On the skills point, the World Economic Forum reports that 44% of workers' core skills are expected to change in the next 5 years. And when we at EY have surveyed across European financial services on AI, we can see that 77% of executives are readying for a significant impact to their workforce and operations because of Gen AI as well. To add to that disruption, you've got green and digital transformation effectively coined the twin transition and leading to dramatic changing skills needs. The ILO estimates that 24 million green jobs will be created by 2030. And between 2022 and 2023, if you look at job postings requiring a minimum one green skill, that has already increased by 22%. And of course, the external ecosystem is not getting any easier. External pressures we know have potential to bear quite heavily through disruption to immigration system. We know that climate migration is potentially a challenge that the world will be facing together. The World Bank estimates there could be 1.2 billion climate refugees by 2050. So systems that are built have to be smart and sustainable throughout these disruptions and not disruptive to economic growth strategy. So what are, and we're just going to stay on this for 1 second, but so what are global markets doing now on all of this? Well, when we have looked across the UK's competitor markets for the sector, 100% of those are focused on strategic talent programs. They are maximizing brand. And I said we're going to talk about brand quite a bit. This is a really important point. Why is brand so important now more than ever? Well, employee expectations have shifted. What employees expect from their work experience now is fundamentally different. Employees believe that they can work virtually. There are digital nomads, something we talk about in the November 22 report, which makes it a lot more challenging for governments to attract high demand talent across borders. And at the same time, we're seeing some governments that we've looked at tapping into virtual talent pools more readily. And then the competition. These global talent pools really have a vast array of options now, and there is a huge competition for limited talent pools, particularly when we look at some of the UK strategic growth areas. I'm so sorry for that pinging. I'm unable to stop it. So if we move on one slide, what is all of that driving when we look at policy? Well, it's driving a shift away from broad immigration policy to a much more nuanced approach that typically aligns an immigration strategy to one or more of 4 areas. Now, these are not separate areas. They tend to all fall together. But what we're seeing is an increasing focus on building streams, immigration streams, that really deal with specific economic objectives or specific skills gaps. Now, they fall into four broad categories. The demographic gaps, where the aim is to future-proof the workforce amidst an aging population. Those that are targeting key skills sets. Those that are focused on the innovators, the entrepreneurs, creating the next global disruption, ensuring job creation at scale. And then those that are focused on economic diversification. So moving economies into new sectors and the prioritization of sectors within that as well. Now, if we move on to the next slide. In our case studies, we've done a global view. So when you look at the report, you'll be able to benchmark all of the different competitor markets against one another in these four areas. But in our case studies, what we do is we pick up on some thematic examples that we're seeing emerge. The one that I want to focus on for this session today is digital and tech skills, because we are seeing a speed of change here that is hyperactive at the moment, and there is no sign of it abating. Now, the need for tech skills is perhaps the biggest driver for policymakers currently, and many countries that we looked at are announcing initiatives to future-proof their AI skills base in particular. Now, if you look at the US and UK, for example, over the last 2 months of 2023, we saw the US and the UK announce major strategies to attract and retain tech talent in this very competitive area. In the US, there was an executive order shortly before the AI Tech Safety Summit in the UK, which focused specifically on AI. Now, interestingly, within that order, there are targeted immigration initiatives to bring in required AI talent. But importantly, it also calls for the creation of a global campaign to promote the US brand as an attractive destination for science and technologies to work, study, or research in. And again, this is quite significant because the US is not short of the numbers of people that are looking to apply to the immigration system. It's a very attractive destination already for migrants, but it shows that the barriers to attracting talent, governments are really trying hard to overcome them. And the other thing that the executive order talks about is process. How do we make the practical implementation of all of these policies much more appealable to the end user? And so interestingly, whilst a lot of these policies are focused on attracting AI talent, we're actually seeing at the same time an increased focus on application efficiency and, in fact, the use of AI to streamline and improve customer experience. And just on that, immigration and AI, it's not in UK, and it's not a new relationship. There's been the use of AI in immigration application systems since 2006, since then. Now, over the summer of last year, the Canadian government also announced a new tech talent strategy. Interestingly, again, consulting with tech industry stakeholders to clearly identify the specific skills needed. The strategy aims to bring in the talent with the key skills, with new routes for US H-1B holders, streams for highly skilled individuals, STEM entry, reduced process time, startup visa programs, and a global skills strategy work permit. And Canada also is looking at the role that digital nomads can play in promoting and elevating the industry. So how can you tap into virtual pools, alleviating some pressure on the immigration system, but making sure that your country has access to the skills needed for growth? Now, Australia, again, is a country that we look at in the report. And this is not, what Australia has been doing here is not new, but the interesting thing is that you're now starting to see three years in the pull through of the measures that Australia has been introducing. So in 2020, Australia launched the Global Business and Talent Attraction Task Force and Global Talent Program. And these were aimed at targeting highly talented individuals who would create opportunities for Australians by transferring skills, promoting innovation, and creating jobs. AI, advanced digital data science, information and communications technology were actually sectors for the highest number of visas granted under the Global Talent Program. And as a result of these initiatives, what we see three and a bit years later is that Australia's tech workforce has grown by 8% between February 2022 and February 2023, which puts them on track with their economic objective of 1.2 million technology-related jobs by 2030. So if we move on one slide, and this is stating the obvious, but it's a fast-changing environment, as you'll see from the measures that I've just talked about, all the other ones in the report. And the important thing here, clicking on one more slide, is that the UK is really coming here from a position of strength. We've already seen that emerging focus on tech and solidifying the UK's AI skills base. I think it was on the 31st of October last year, the government announced the 180 million funding package focused on AI skills. Core component of that is a visa scheme dedicated to the world's most talented AI researchers to encourage researchers to come to the UK early in their careers, build careers, ideas, businesses, jobs in the UK. And then the 1 million AI Futures grant scheme to help top researchers and engineers with the cost of relocating to the UK. So the trajectory there is strong, and the wheels are there for future innovation. So moving on, what does good look like? Amidst all of the competition that we talk about in the report, in a fast-changing environment, what does positioning the UK for success actually require? Well, fundamentally, it requires what we talk about in the why of the report, which is a really clear understanding of the immigration and economic productivity relationship in a holistic way, looking at direct and indirect factors. And this is very important, with a critical awareness of potential unintended consequences of policy shifts at a broad level and how they may impact strategic growth objectives at a more nuanced level without the policymakers intending that to happen. And in the report, we look at the various streams in the UK policies. We've done a deep dive into the student strategies, graduate strategies, skilled worker, innovator, entrepreneur categories. And I won't take you through all of those points here, but we've looked at where is the UK doing well relative to competitors. What are the areas where competitors are at least matching or offering something that is more competitive? And what does that mean for where the UK can go next, should it choose to do so in terms of additional policy initiatives? So let's click on one slide, please. So what is the ask? The ask is continued innovation from a position of strength that fundamentally builds the UK's brand globally as an attractive destination for global talent. And again, this importance of the UK brand really cannot be understated in the competitive environment and the changed workforce that now sits in our global economies. What the UK also needs to think about doing is establishing a strategic global talent working group with stronger public-private partnerships, engaging with education sectors and adapting to changing needs. And of course, the domestic skills piece and dialogue on that is a critical part of that. What that should allow policymakers to do is really pivot to a much more dynamic global talent strategy, which could potentially sit within the proposed Financial and Professional Services Council under the City of London's vision for economic growth. And one that will convene key stakeholder groups, but will be adaptable to meet the disruption, the opportunities, and the impending AI and green skills challenges that we've addressed. Another key factor here is to really think about how do policymakers leverage new ways of working to access global skills virtually, building partnerships that enable access to talent leveraging technology on borderless workforces. And in the report, we give some really good examples of where we're seeing that happen globally. And then looking at talent partnerships with trade partners, boosting mutually beneficial international mobility should be a priority for the coming year. Continuing to improve, as you said in earlier reports and in this report as well, improving service and trade routes, creating a UK knowledge and support hub to showcase the UK's offer to the world, could attract an additional 24 billion of FPS exports, 700 million of foreign direct investment, and 5,000 jobs from FDI by 2030. That's all good news for the UK and good news for the UK's economic growth strategy. And finally, and most importantly, promoting an evidence and data-based approach to the strategic global talent and productivity discourse to ensure that policy decisions around this highly complex area are always informed by a very changing external ecosystem and the UK's own economic objectives. Now, to end, we pretty much end where we started, which is a sustainable global talent strategy is needed. But for a global talent strategy to be needed, one that is sustainable and one that doesn't shift in cycles, it must have at its core a strong domestic skills strategy. And again, in the report where we've seen good examples of that working elsewhere, we've drawn those out for everyone to see. Eric, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Look forward to hearing from the panel their thoughts on that in particular. But just before I close, can I just say a huge thank you to our EY teams for their work on this. We're across 150 global immigration locations, and it's that insight that helps us to really benchmark the UK versus rest of world. And a huge thank you to Eric and the City of London team for their hard work and partnership. Thank you so much, Eric. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Seema, and thank you to the EY team as well. That was very comprehensive and quite informative. So I think what we can do now for those online is we can share in the chat the link where the report will be available. And for those who happen to catch this later, we will have a slide at the end equally showing where you can find the report in its entirety. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eric Jordan. I'm the Senior Regulation and Business Environment Advisor at the City of London Corporation. It is my honor to be moderating today's panel discussion and the following Q&A. Before we turn to the panelists, I'd just like to reiterate a few of those housekeeping points from earlier, although I should say some of you have already begun to do it, but a reminder that you should see the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. Please do feel free to ask questions throughout. We'll do our best to get responses or indeed bring them in at the Q&A session at the end of our panel discussion. If you have a question that's directed at a specific panelist, please do be sure to include that. Right, with that out of the way, let's jump right in, as I think there's lots to unpack and we have too good a panel to waste time. So thank you again, Seema, for that presentation, and I think it sets the scene nicely for us to discuss some really topical and important issues. I would just sort of say that it's a Zoom call, so we're slightly limited by the technology, but I will introduce our panelists as they appear on my screen, rotating around clockwise, and I will ask them for just a few minutes reflection on that presentation, and then we can move into sort of more moderated question and answer format. So with that, let me just look at Claire. I see you right at the top of my screen. So Claire Tunley is the CEO of the Financial Services Skills Commission. Claire was appointed CEO of the FSSC in May 2020. Prior to this role, Claire was the head of skills at the City of London Corporation, and she's worked in skills and economic development in both local and central government roles for over 20 years. I'm delighted to welcome you to the panel today, Claire. Thank you so much for joining, and I look forward to hearing some of your initial thoughts. Over to you.
Thanks, Eric. Just very briefly, I thought a really interesting report, and thanks to Seema for presenting the key points. The key work for us as the Financial Services Skills Commission, we look at domestic talent pipelines. So I couldn't agree more with your point, Seema, about aligning an international talent strategy with a very strong domestic skills strategy, which I think there's a bit of a gap there at the moment, so happy to get into that later, but I completely agree with your point about that alignment.
Great, thank you. Moving along, Ksenia Grant. Ksenia is the Director of Ecosystem and Partnerships at the Centre for Finance, Innovation and Technology, or CFIT. Ksenia is responsible for growing relationships and identifying national and regional collaboration opportunities. She leads on delivering CFIT's communications and skills strategies. Prior to CFIT, Ksenia gained extensive experience at the University of Edinburgh, developing high-profile, long-term, multi-million-pound partnerships on innovation and skills with prominent financial services and fintech companies. She has a background in strategic business development as well as marketing and communications. Welcome, Ksenia.
Hi, everyone. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for having me. Yeah, with us as CFIT, really our vision and kind of mission is to really unblock barriers to innovation for the financial services and fintech sector. So we do believe that really innovation is central to addressing some of the greatest challenges in the UK. But obviously, to be able to innovate, you need the right skills. So we really welcome this report. I think it's fantastic analysis and really interesting to see the comparison with different countries, you know, kind of considered as our competitors, to really have it represented in terms of how we perform against others. So really welcome that, and really also echo what Claire said around combining some of those findings with actually national and regional strategies and skills. So looking forward to discussions and some of the other points discussed further later on.
Great, thank you. Andrew, I see you next. Andrew Coop is Head of Trade and Services, Investment and Business Mobility at the Department for Business and Trade, or DBT. Andrew's a senior lawyer and policy advisor focusing on UK-EU trade in services, investment and business mobility. In previous roles, Andrew negotiated free trade agreement provisions on behalf of both the UK and the EU. He's represented the UK government in bringing contractual arbitration claims, and he's led a team developing and delivering UK sanctions legislation covering services exports. Andrew, welcome to today's panel. Good to have you, and keen to hear the government's or your department's reflections on the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. It's great to be here, and it's my thanks are due to Seema and to her team for producing such a fantastic report. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment, but before that, I'd like to say a little bit about DBT, Department of Business and Trade. I will be expressing my own thoughts today, but I'll try and represent government policy as accurately as I can. And I am, of course, a neutral civil servant, except, of course, after a few drinks, but unfortunately we can't have those online, so I will remain neutral at all times. A little bit about Department of Business and Trade. In a sense, we are the Department for Prosperity. We try to help British firms export services and also to access international opportunities and talent, not just through trade agreements, but also by making the prosperity case for initiatives that fall outside trade agreements like youth mobility, and ensuring that the business voice is heard across government as we develop our business visa system. And in doing that, we work with other departments, including some who are not here today, like crucially the Home Office, who own UK immigration policy. Events like this one are absolutely indispensable in developing the business case for changes to our system, and they strongly influence the recent reforms from the Home Office, which broadened what short-term business visitors can do while they're here, which Seema and her team can, of course, tell you all about. Just to set this report in a policy context for a moment, there are many different things that trade policy can do for services, and that's really important for the UK because that's about half of all our exports. We all know about free trade agreements, where the main thing governments agree to do is not to obstruct trade using various restrictions on foreign competition. And one of the most important aspects of UK trade policy is that our market is already pretty open to everyone. We are already pretty free traders, allowing British firms to access global talent, whether online or through business visits. But mobility is, of course, a uniquely sensitive area where trade and domestic policy intersect. And our interest as a department is mainly about temporary and short-term business travel, more interested in that than long-term migration, but of course, both can contribute to prosperity. Turning briefly to this report, in short, it's excellent. And I've spent more time than is strictly healthy thinking about UK business migration policy, but I did learn quite a lot. I found the collation of information really useful, and I'll be referring that, and I and my team will be looking at that again. Certainly pages 18 to 21 on the ups and downs of the UK's approach to students, skilled workers, entrepreneurs, and rocket scientists were really useful. The summary of what we've already done and could still do on page 28, it's fantastic to see all this so clearly set out in one place, and I think it will really help businesses to cut through the noise and focus on the parts of the system where they can suggest improvements. If they want to make those suggestions directly to us, great, because as I said, we make the case across government for prosperity-driven changes to our system. It's also really good to see recognition of what the government already does well and of the changes that have made our system more competitive, for example, on relocation assistance for high potential individuals. And lastly, one interesting idea that the report covers, but which I'd like to see developed in more detail, is around borderless work and access to skills without physical presence. And the report recognizes that some of the most crucial targeted skills can be accessed remotely, and that some companies are taking proactive steps to do that. Of course, some skills can't be accessed remotely, like those of Premier League footballers, but the UK's openness to foreign services and investment means our firms already face pretty low barriers in accessing those international services and talent. And we also reinforce this in our digital trade agreements, which prevent trade restrictions in the digital area, like data localization requirements. But I'd certainly be interested in learning more about how regulators can make that even easier by working together. Other think tanks like the Resolution Foundation have also focused on that recently, so I think there's more that we could do to develop those policies. So those are just a few remarks from me. Happy to pass over to another panelist. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Jonathan. Jonathan Portes is a professor of economics and public policy at King's College London. And before transitioning to academia, Jonathan had a distinguished career as a civil servant, having started in the Treasury, then serving as a chief economist at the Department for Work and Pensions from 2002 to 2008, and a chief economist at the Cabinet Office from 2008 to 2011. Since moving to academia, Jonathan has focused on economic impacts of Brexit, and in particular, the economic impacts of immigration policies. In fact, Jonathan, I believe you've just published something last week on the changing composition of migration and the UK labour market. So particularly good time to have you join the panel and bring your reflections based on some of your own research. Over to you.
Thanks. Let me start by saying that I think this is indeed an excellent paper. And I think the particular value is sort of highlighting that this is a competitive market and the UK is competing with other countries, both on who can come here, but also on the experience for both businesses and employers on the one hand, and people and workers on the other, of the migration system, and that the UK is doing well in some respects and not so well in others, and that actually in many ways we have improved, but there are still quite a number of areas, not necessarily relating so much to who can come here, but how the systems work, how efficient they are, the costs and so on, where we could improve. And I think that's exactly the right message to send to government. And I agreed with a lot of what Andrew just said as well. So let me try and sort of introduce at least a little bit of controversy, however, which is to push back, to make a couple of points. First of all, and semi-political ones. First of all, the sort of lip service paid in the report, also by Claire and by both government and opposition, to the need to join up migration strategies with skill strategies. At the risk of sounding deliberately controversial, I think this is basically wrong. I think the idea that there is some sort of direct substitution between migrant workers and domestic workers is usually wrong as a matter of economics, both theoretically and empirically, and probably more important, practically. I think it is a recipe for delay and bureaucracy and the failure to get things done in terms of both skills and migration strategies. It simply delays things. The UK has been terrible at skills across a wide range of areas for a very long time. We should concentrate on sorting that out. Trying to join it up with migration is just another thing that will get in the way of actually having a decent set of skill strategies in a very variety of different sectors. And I'm particularly aiming my remarks at Labour here, I think, who have said some things on this, which frankly, I think are just not deliverable. So I'd like to get, and the second point I'd like to make is just to emphasize the need for stability. We've had an awful lot of change in the migration system over the last few years, inevitably as a result of Brexit. And as my paper says, I think in many ways, intended or unintended, the results have been broadly positive, but we could really use a period of stability. And looking particularly at the changes to the work-related migration system that were announced in December. I think some of these are perfectly sensible. Raising the salary threshold in principle is not a bad idea. The way in which it was implemented, without any attempt at a serious impact assessment, any consultation with the affected sectors, I see already one or two questions in the Q&A about this, where people frankly just don't know what they need to do, is absolutely the wrong way to make policy for business, both from the point of view of employers and business and from the point of view of people and workers. And it would be really useful if government, under whichever party, could just have a period of broad stability in this area for a while, and just try and make things better around the edges, rather than claiming that they're going to solve all our problems. I'll stop there for the moment.
Thank you, Jonathan. And last but certainly by no means least, Seema, given that you gave the presentation, maybe you might want to have an initial reaction to some of our other panelists' views.
Thanks, Eric, and thank you very much, everyone, for that feedback. It's very warmly received. And I think, Jonathan, I think you raised a great point, and I think the point that we're making in the report, and you alluded to it there as well, is that to drive that economic growth, what businesses fundamentally need is a stability. The problem with immigration policy is that it is very challenging. There are so many different parts of an immigration system that when there's pressure, when you have a kind of broad brush approach to policy, when there's pressure in one system, it's on the other side of the system where you have an unintended consequence because there is a restriction, or there is something that actually makes the environment much more difficult for areas where the government is actually trying to encourage economic growth. So the focus on, so the point being made, and again, my area of expertise is immigration, so I'll defer to Claire on the domestic skills point, but I think the point of the relationship between the two is not that they don't play their own part in economic productivity, they absolutely do. But in order to deliver that sustainable policy for businesses where there isn't, where you don't have the swinging of a pendulum in one way or another, you have to have a much more sustainable migration policy, which requires a real focus on domestic skills to plug areas where employers are potentially looking to global markets because they don't have domestic opportunities. I think I'm not really disagreeing with what you're saying, but I think there are. I do think the two definitely play their own part, but there is an inextricable link between the two. And a good example of that is, of course, the shortage occupation list, where you've got roles staying on the shortage occupation list for very long periods of time. And the reasoning behind that is, again, beyond my expertise, Claire, to defer to you on that, but it's just an example of where we see that pressure then having an unintended consequence in another part of the immigration system.
Thanks, Seema. I mean, Claire, it seems like a natural place to pivot. And I suppose maybe to some extent we can try to contextualize this. So you recently launched a report in November, the FSSC did, that showed 77% of jobs in the financial services sectors were highly skilled, and that trend was increasing, but at the same time that there's a skills proficiency shortfall. So to the extent that we can maybe address some of the comments from Jonathan and Seema in terms of, do we seek to grow the whole pie? Do we seek to try to target specific skills? How do you envision the sort of domestic pipeline working and accessing the international one?
Sure. I think it's complex. There's a lot of moving parts and there's a lot of areas of focus. You know, the work we do at the Commission is on the domestic pipeline, and it does intersect with migration of talent. Absolutely, it's different sources that firms look at. What we see from a domestic point of view is the need for higher skilled roles, particularly with tech talent, but there are other skills areas, green skills, for example, are in there, but tech is the acute area where firms have got gaps. Data analytics and software development are the areas that are highest up there. Data will start to show AI coming through, no doubt. And that means firms need to look at getting those skills in. And this is not about just recruitment from education. This is about developing, reskilling the existing workforce. So for financial services, there's 1 million people working in the sector. And if we look forward to another 10 years, they will still, most of those people will still be in the sector. So the opportunity to upskill and reskill them has to be done while they're in work and in partnership with employers. There is a place for talent coming through and graduates and people coming out of education into work. But we need to work with the existing workforce. And I think what we see at the moment is there's some gaps around that. There's certain initiatives from government that aren't necessarily joined up to meet the needs from employers. And there's a few gaps in the mechanisms to plug in what employers need into the government's thinking. So we have programs around apprenticeship skills boot camps, for example, that go some way, but there's no mechanism to get industry needs into domestic skills policy. There's process with the MAC, etc. So I think there's just a few missed opportunities to join the picture, and it does need moving, because ultimately the numbers we need, the higher skilled roles in financial services will continue to grow. We know that they are largely tech driven. They're still financial services roles, but with an increasing tech element, and that will grow even further. And we are not providing those. We're having to look everywhere overseas to fill those gaps and reskill at scale and at cost in a deep way in the sector to get the skills we need. So there does need to be a very clear long-term plan, not only for financial services, but for the UK's domestic workforce as a whole, really focused around reskilling, how we're going to get people already in work to keep their skills up to date for the future. And as the report points out, this is something that other territories are looking at. They, very clearly either looking at talent plans aligned to a economic plan, a productivity and a growth plan. So Singapore, Australia, exactly, that's what they're doing. We're also failing because other territories have a much more embedded learning culture in society. So in terms of the UK is one of the lowest performing territories when you look at employee training in terms of numbers and hours. Other EU countries particularly have a much more embedded learning culture that they can draw on, and just that ongoing learning through work isn't as strong in the UK. So we are facing battles on several fronts.
Thank you, Claire. I wonder if maybe, Ksenia, we can pivot to you. Something Claire mentioned that was quite interesting was the potential missed opportunities in connecting businesses to needs, and in particular with respect to the coalitions and the partnerships that you work with. Do you see SMEs struggling more so than or struggling same as others with accessing the skills that they need? And is the international accessibility a route that they would like to pursue more?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, obviously, there's always a very tight labor market where there's a high competition for this highly skilled workers. But what we see from SMEs is this is even worse for them in terms of trying to compete in that space. Obviously, they as smaller businesses, they will have less resources available to them in terms of their in-house HR, careers, kind of marketing teams that can really design those strategies and tap into networks to really go for the highly skilled talents. And obviously, being kind of fintech SMEs is where we are really engaging. That these are companies that obviously are growing, innovating, developing new products, especially in the earlier stages, and therefore they're really going after this highly skilled tech talent, potentially even more so than some of the other companies. But at the same time, they are competing for those tech skills with very well established large financial services companies and tech companies as well. But they don't have necessarily, especially the ones that are kind of in their earlier stages, they don't have that maybe brand recognition within the potential employees. So it's harder for them to attract those workers. There's also the other potential kind of issue, as Claire alluded to, reskilling, upskilling, obviously there is less focus on in those organizations. Again, on that, for a variety of reasons, they need to grow and develop, and they just need the right skills at the right time, and they also don't necessarily have the resources to invest into upskilling of the workers. So that's kind of another area where they find it difficult. I mean, on the kind of positive side, I guess maybe worth mentioning that I was in your report already that kind of the 9 out of 14 startup unicorns have at least one non-UK born co-founder. So obviously we're doing something right in terms of attracting the people who think this is an innovative environment. There's a place to start a company. I guess where the issues kind of come is in growing that business. But equally, we also heard from a number of companies saying that they really welcomed this scale-up visa route, which is really helping those kind of scale-up companies to then bring individuals to work with them. So there are some initiatives that we are seeing that are helping those businesses. Obviously, we would like to see more of those. But yeah, I mean, definitely there is an interest and a need for international talent, and your report actually mentioned really high numbers of international talent that are employed in fintechs and SMEs specifically versus actually FS. So definitely a growing need and demand for that international talent within SME population.
Thank you, Ksenia, and I think rightly so, mentioning again some of the positives. So we'll pivot to you, Andrew. You also mentioned, and the report does as well, things that we're doing right. I wonder if maybe you could share with us your view of what good or great even looks like for 2024. How would you envision the UK's continued access to international talent, or improving that access?
Thank you very much, Eric. You know, visions of greatness are dangerous things, but I think we certainly do have a vision of steady improvement, and we look to make the case for that across government where we can. In the spring budget statement in last year, the government said it would look at changing aspects of our system for business visitors, and it did. And in the autumn statement, they confirmed that they would broaden the range of business activities which visitors may do here while they're here under a standard visitor's visa, with the result that visitors may now...
Sorry, Andrew, just to interrupt, we're getting quite a lot of feedback from your microphone. Would you mind...
Okay.
Yeah, there we are.
Is that any better?
That is better. Oh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Okay. So recently we expanded the range of things that, well, we made it possible for visitors on a standard visa into the UK to undertake some client-facing work where that's incidental to the main purpose of their visit. Is it clear? Is my mic clear now? Not very.
I'm afraid it's crackling quite a bit on our side.
Oh, that's annoying. I can. Is that any better?
That is better, yeah.
That's good. Great. Okay. So we made it possible that some visitors to the UK on standard visitor visas may undertake some kinds of work for customers while they are here, provided that work is incidental to the main purpose of their here. That's an example of kind of incremental improvement that business advocated and which the government delivered. In going forward in the future, we're looking at other improvements, quite a few of them, of the same kind of scale. So these are not these are not things which are going to lead us to greatness overnight, but which they may make it steadily more attractive for foreign companies to do business here and easier for people to do business while they are here. And that includes things like looking at these are just simply policy ideas that we're thinking about at the moment. They're not government policy. They're looking at whether the English language requirements are appropriate in all circumstances for all categories of worker. I've often asked myself, not that I'm a football maniac, but I've often asked myself whether the Premier League players were actually subject to an English language requirement. I'm not even sure that all the English players speak English that well. But so we're looking at that. We're looking at whether
innovations are possible for very short-term activities in the UK. It's easy to make the case for a visa if you're coming here for 6 months or a year. It's less easy to make the case for doing that for 2 weeks. And yet there are some activities which you may not do even for those very short periods without a visa. And we're also looking at whether some of the new visa categories which we have created, like those for tech accelerators and scaling up, are on exactly the right terms, or whether we could vary those in some way to make them available to a wide range of people. So a few things like that. It's steady progress rather than great leap forward, but altogether it adds up to quite a lot.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Look, as I said at the outset, I knew this was going to happen. So much to discuss, so many great experts on the panel, and time has absolutely flown. I think maybe given the 4 minutes that remain and wanting to allow my colleagues some time to give some concluding remarks, what I might do is a quick round table. And Jonathan, you sort of alluded to this, but and it's come up in one of the questions largely in looking at the international context of how really country by country there seems to be maybe a change in attitudes towards access to international talent or immigration, and thinking particularly of an election year here in the UK. What is the sort of the greatest opportunity for the system? And yeah, I'll ask everyone to sort of keep the remarks briefly. So let's go around in the order that I introduced you. Claire, if you could maybe give us a view of what's our greatest opportunity for 2024.
I think the opportunity is we've got a lot going on in the country in 2024. We're going to very likely have a change of government. So I think there's real opportunity to, take stock of the things we have got that are positive. As you said, the Global Talent Report yesterday put, UK and London as a leading global financial centre. But as was said before, let's not be complacent. There is work to do. There are gaps to fill. So do not sit back. Let's keep going.
Thank you. Ksenia.
Yes, thank you. I think I would really like to see a bit more happening in the kind of partnerships area around academia working with the sector to actually attract students that we have, in the UK, both local or international, to get to know the sector and really think about their jobs in the sector to apply, because obviously, as we mentioned before, we're competing with a variety of others for highly skilled. So also exposing the students to the sector and really showing the innovation side of the sector would be very useful. Obviously, in the longer term, there are a variety of other things we want to see. I mean, personally, I would actually like to see a bit more on the visa or a variety of other schemes to kind of attract students to stay after and the studies, because at the moment we are actually not comparing very well to some of the other countries. And there's no obvious route to kind of have this time on student visa counted towards residency, for example, and that actually discourages people from looking for jobs here. So I appreciate it's not going to maybe happen in 2024, but I think it's something that may be worth seeing how we can make more of a case to attract the international students to stay and work in the UK.
Thank you. Andrew. Unfortunately, we can't hear you, Andrew. Shall we pivot to Jonathan while we give you a chance to try to reset your microphone?
I think I would make 2 points. First of all, the meta point, which is just that government should prioritize stability and assessing the impact of its policies before and consulting with sectors and actually doing the analysis and work before announcing policies, rather than being panicked into them by headlines in the newspapers. So just getting the basics of policy making on a more sensible footing would be my first priority. Beyond that, I think I agree with Ksenia. It seems to me the biggest opportunity is the fact that we do actually have a huge number of international students in the UK, and we now have a relatively flexible and generous postgraduate visa scheme. Actually, universities and the relevant sectors getting together to ensure that we can allow international students and employers to take advantage of that route would, I think, be the sort of biggest single potential opportunity.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. And Andrew, let's see. Unfortunately, still not. Shall we try Seema? Would you like to give just a quick top opportunity for 2024?
I would agree with everything that everybody has said, but look, we've come through so much change. I think we thought pandemic was again, the pandemic was disruptive, but really the skills, AI, green skills, all of the challenges, what we're seeing, future opportunity on another level, as well as potential disruption. So to me, it would be move forward from the position of strength that the UK is in and really just drive further innovation that leads globally on these issues.
Excellent. Well, thank you all very much. I think maybe, Andrew, if possible, to drop in the chat function for everyone to see your sort of key opportunities, how we keep momentum, keep a positive narrative about accessing international talent. And in the meantime, please, everyone at home or in the office, virtually join me in thanking our fantastic panelists. And I think with that, what I'd like to do is pivot to my colleague, Olivia Larkin, for some closing remarks. Thank you all.
Thanks, all. And thanks, Eric, so much for chairing a great panel. It's been great to hear some of the views as well as the challenges from our panelists today, and to hear what they'd like to see most in the coming years. Really helpful to sort of complement what we're doing with this report. We know that the UK financial and professional services sector is world leading, but in order to stay on top, we really need the talent required to fill these widely acknowledged skills and talent gaps that we're clearly facing today. We're really proud to see what the report has highlighted in the essential values that international talent is offering to the UK financial and professional services workforce, and the positive impacts, including bringing in workers with the skills, qualifications, and expertise that's needed to complement the domestic skills of the current workforce. We've seen the need to have some of this international talent, in addition to bettering our domestic skill strategies. These needs include having an aging workforce, changes to skills demands, as well as the various economic benefits that international talent offers to us. And whether that international talent complements the domestic skills strategies that we have in the UK, or this happens separately, it is still very clear that we need access to this talent to drive the productivity of the UK FPS workforce. All of our competitor markets are introducing migration policies to drive economic productivity, so we need to do the same in order to remain competitive. We hope that the recommendations that we've included in this report are taken up by industry and by government, and that there's more collaboration between the two. And I'd like to say a final thanks to our panelists, Eric, Seema, and everyone for joining today. Thanks so much. Take care and have a great rest of your day.